Welcome to Talk Gnosis. Today is going to be a bit of a different kind of show than a lot of the ones we've done before. For the last while, a lot of our show has been interview based, following new releases of books or studies or stuff that's involved in our studies or whatever catches our interest, something that's going on in the current zeitgeist. Interviews aren't going away, but today on Talk Gnosis, we're actually going to talk a bit more about the idea of being critical, not just about like a particular text or story, but looking at Gnosticism critically. I always say that one of the important elements of Gnosticism is about being critical about what is presented to you. And that's often represented as trying to see past the received wisdom of, say, a particular religion or politics or what have you. And so in this case, we're going to look critically at Gnosticism in general. We're going to try to map Gnosticism and see if we can what use we can make of the ideas we can find across the map of Gnosticism. Jon is here with me. And part of the inspiration of this was like trying to find a new voice for conversations in modern Gnosticism. I think a lot of what I hear out there are conversations that are either starting from a presupposition of like hardcore dualist world hatred, or with a very understandable academic and historical distance. And so if you're new to the field, if you're getting interested in Gnosticism, it seems like you either have to pick academic distance or hardcore engagement. And we're gonna engage with Gnosticism as practitioners who value research. So for us, it's kind of both. We're talking about Gnosticism as Gnostics, which kind of also includes some of our previous episodes of things like meta-Gnostic. Jon, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. And I'm really excited to dive in. I think something like this is really needed, not to blow our own horns, but there isn't any other show for the most part that's really from a practitioner standpoint when it specifically comes to Gnosticism. You have some kind of related things, right? Mystical Christianity, esoterica, what have you, the different paths where practitioners are presenting media about that path definitely exists. Movements connected to Gnosticism, but specifically Gnosticism, not really. I think as well, uh, continuing to dance that delicate line between scholarship, belief, practice, is also important. Something we're going to keep doing, right? With the interviews, sometimes we talk to the atheists and agnostic scholars, right? We also talk to practitioners. We talk to artists. We talk to all sorts of people who have all sorts of different beliefs and all sorts of different perspectives on how you do Gnosticism. Carrying that balance forward, right? Some of what we're going to be doing some research. It's going to be academically informed. We're going to have some information that is academic, that is not coming from our heart or from our brains about Gnosticism. So there is still that informative learning aspect. It's not just Jason and I doing commentary, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and the Jason's even kind of called the project, not or the original name for the first show, Gnosticism 201, right? Gnosticism 101, where in some ways we are going through the basics, but I think the way that we're approaching the quote unquote basics is open to anybody, to newbies. But I think even if you've been knocking around the Gnostic world, you've been interested, you are a practitioner, you are someone who's, a Christian who goes to church but has some interest in these texts for your own spiritual life, I think that the show will have a lot to offer you because of some of the unique perspectives that we're going to bring in, some of the issues we're going to be examining. Because there are some contemporary issues that both uh, we're very excited about, but ones that we don't like as much. And Jason and I are both nice Canadian Libras. Uh, we're nice boys, ladies and gentlemen. We're two nice boys. So we're not going to get our criticism is going to be very vague. Um, uh, except when we're looking at sort of wider societal trends that I think connect to Gnosticism, where, of course, we can talk about that trend in a specific way. We're not going to
Mhm.
be talking about any particular thinkers, people, groups of people, what have you. So I hope this is all making sense to people. But Jason, like just the other day, I was talking at my parish actually, and it's something I'm really excited to get to for basically show two what is Gnosticism, where is Gnosticism in 2025. Sorry to give the spoiler out. So, um, just to give you in the audience an example. I was kind of talking about how the quote unquote rebelliousness of Gnosticism is in some ways not as how would you put this? Okay, in today's society, the the being a countercultural rebel is mainstream. It's actually what everybody is supposed to do.
Mhm.
We're now a society of individual rebels, right?
Mhm.
So rebellion is the new conformity. And I think people who are not older or who didn't grow up in some very specific circumstances don't really realize, how regulated the world once was, right? Or even embracing alternative spiritualities, both how hard that would be for somebody in both the practical and relational terms.
Mhm.
So just the idea if we are going to look at Gnosticism as a rebellious spirituality. What does that mean when everybody's a rebel, right? Like I can't quite wrap my head around this, as well as is something that we talk about when we talk about my thesis, which is I do believe that Gnosticism is a very important thing in the West. It hangs around in the background, right?
Mhm.
And it's very influential but unrecognized, and that influence could also go in negative ways, right? It's value neutral. The people get Gnostic ideas and they can appropriate them, they can develop them, they can change them, they can misunderstand them, they can creatively misunderstand them. So
Mhm.
I think a lot of ideas that either started with the Gnostics or that pre-existed before, after, at the same time as the Gnostics, but were powerful Gnostic feeds, right, and kind of pulled out of the wider society and put it into their systems are now kind of omnipresent. It's really about how you combine everything that makes it
Yeah.
not
Well,
yeah,
and
go
to
ahead.
to dive into that a bit, just that notion of like the rebelliousness and like that emergent property or that in the background thing. I think there's a sense in which the rebelliousness element of Gnosticism that in fact probably attracted like a lot of folks to Gnosticism, like attracted you and I to it, like in various ways, is ultimately only a second order effect from talking about gnosis.
Yeah.
And so like that's kind of a thing I think we sometimes part of the reason I wanted to start talking about mapping the subject is because when are we talking about gnosis and when are we talking about rebelling against a church or rebelling against orthodoxy or what have you, and sometimes rebellion is necessary or and sometimes pushing back against something is necessary, but it's not, but not all rebellions are gnostic, if that makes sense.
Yes,
um yeah.
absolutely. And we also
or
live in
or
a very
gnosis fueled.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And we also live in a very postmodern meta world, right? People are
Mhm.
very used to examining literature, media, and religion from this sort of meta standpoint. I
Mhm.
find it's actually come to the point where it's infected everything, right? It's very hard now to find media that doesn't break the fourth wall, for example,
Mhm.
which is
Mhm.
very interesting, right? And this is, of course, not specifically a Gnostic idea, but at the same time, Gnosticism is all about breaking the fourth wall in a way, right? It's that we're the ones breaking the fourth wall in reality. Uh, so, anyways, I, I'm just using a few examples here uh, where I was all going with this. Another one is everybody is divine, a piece of the divine, which is, once a shocking idea, depending on the context, is
Mhm.
now probably the mainstream spirituality in the spiritual, not religious, secular society that we live in, right?
Mhm.
So again, it's been completely sort of sapped of anything sort of interesting, right? And when we're looking at
Mhm.
the appeal of Gnosticism, okay, well, any New Ager will tell you that we're all divine. Um, so this I'm very interested in pulling on some of these threads, right? Of these Gnostic themes that are running through society, and how Gnosticism still has a lot to offer people, even though these bits and pieces of it are all over the place, but they're not combined into one. And also, these ideas have, in my opinion, often been misunderstood, misappropriated, misapplied.
Well,
So anyway, I'm
yeah.
already skipping ahead to the second
No,
question.
no, no, no. That's okay. I mean,
On my mind a lot.
it's on my mind too, and I'm hungry for the conversation, which is why we're setting
Yeah.
this up. And even just to dive a little, we're going to briefly touch on this. We'll do probably a full episode on more of the specific texts on the subject as well. But just to briefly touch on it, like, yeah, I think um, there are a lot of common misconceptions about Gnosticism, particularly around like Gnostic cosmology, that aren't actually connected to Gnostic texts.
Yeah.
Like this idea of the world as a prison, that the world is a fallen, terrible place. Like, and I want to engage with that idea. I don't want to fully dismiss that idea for anybody who finds that valuable and important, but I think it is also worth noting that I don't think that the extremity of that idea is represented in the texts. Like, is the primary text, correct me on if I'm on this, John, because I think you know them better, but the primary text that refers to all of this kind of stuff is the Apocalypse of John.
That's usually held up as sort of the paradigmatic. Is that how you say that word? The paradigm of of Gnosticism, right? Where it's a very
Yeah.
influential text, seems to have influenced other texts. It's one that we have four different copies of, and so we know from different places. So we know it's kind of well, three from Nag Hammadi, and there's one more from Egypt. But at the same time, it just shows that it was a very popular text, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people, when they think of Gnosticism and the Gnostic myth, they are, even if it's second, third, fourth, fifth hand, even if it's reading Philip K. Dick or watching The Matrix, it's a lot of times what they're thinking of is the Apocryphon of John. So
Mhm.
the Apocalypse of John. I just say the Secret Book of John because that's what that's what the actual title means. So yeah, it is, it does say some not very positive things about the body and in about the world, less about the world really. But you're right, the kind of statements that you're talking about, the kind of construction that you're talking about is it's much more complicated in the Secret Book of John. Yes,
Yeah. And
not that simple.
no, no, like I think like and this is why actually I'll say this again at the end of the episode, but I'm interested to know how people are discovering Gnosticism, because when I hear or when I see discourse online of like oh, this world is a prison and like rebel angels and like, all of these things, I'm like, I feel like that information is often coming to these people asking questions not from a text, not from a Gnostic text, but from like an interpretation of a Gnostic text that is also influenced by, say, Philip K. Dick's Valis, but that the information that's being presented to them isn't acknowledging any of those other texts. It's just saying the Gnostics believed in X. Do you know what I mean? Like, um, and so, yeah, like I think to kind of go like, okay, did they, like, where did that come from? And, how, what use can we find in that idea? And so maybe this is kind of I'll transition into a sort of a next sort of spot here. So I've talked before or earlier in the episode here about, mapping Gnosticism. So I would say like part of what I feel like we can start doing here, and we have done through our interviews, but I think more specifically and overtly, is we're kind of creating a spot for fellow travelers in the Gnostic world, fellow people on the Gnostic journey. There's no single Gnosticism. There's no Gnostic pope that can tell you exactly which demiurge and which archon is in charge of what. We're all exploring the landscape together. And so what John and I are doing, and other people that we'll have on the show as well, are like helping map parts of that area, of what we call Gnosticism, with the idea that maybe our map might help your journey. We're not going to tell you exactly, how you should use the map. That's your journey. If you're so you're listening to us explore in an informed conversation. There's a term that is often bandied about, and some might anticipate what I'm about to say is, but the map is not the territory. Oh no, oh yeah, that's interesting. And I should have looked it up before the show. I should find out where the initial emergence of that term is. But in terms of our point here is that the map is not the territory. Our map is not your territory. That said, no map is perfect. Some maps are useful. You know.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and so that's kind of I think the what we're hoping for. And in terms of how we're mapping and the kind of fellow travelers that you're experiencing here, I think we're going to just maybe touch briefly on our own approach, not necessarily our history of Gnosticism personally, but our approach to Gnosticism at the moment, as like January 2025. And we have other episodes where we've talked, like where each John and I have talked about how we came to Gnosticism, what we find engaging about it. So there's going to be some overlap here. This is more like a little touch on it. Um, so yeah, so like my approach of Gnosticism, I encountered Gnosticism in D&D when a friend of mine, an atheist friend of mine, used it in a D&D campaign set in real world history. And I was fascinated, so I started researching stuff. What kept me around wasn't the cool lore, but the representation of the divine spark, this idea of not only are we all divine, but that there's something that we are waking up, like that we are activating in each other. And the reason that connected for me was art. I make theater, and it described for me what it felt like when I am in the best place possible when I'm making art, when the actors and myself and the audience are all attuned to something that feels true, feels deeply connected, but is somehow also inexpressible. I didn't find that anywhere else. So that really engaged me. I've since become, I think, a lot more interested in philosophy, particularly classical Stoicism, but also like a Socratic process, a lot of investigation, a lot of questioning. I don't have a strong, I would say, like quote unquote religious approach, like or a church based approach. I feel like there's something that I'm connecting with here that is mysterious, but it's not. But I don't engage with it strictly through a faith-based paradigm. I guess I would say, like uh, uh, I'm not excited by or engaged by that process. I'm not opposed to it. I'm not. It doesn't. It's not mutually exclusive for me. But I just that's kind of me laying my cards on the table in terms of my approach to a lot of this. And so, John, you might have a connected but different approach.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I probably originally came to Gnosticism, and we talked about this in our individual shows. So go back and watch those, folks. But reading Philip K. Dick, but also just being a precocious youngster who was really interested in world religions, right? And also interested in alchemy and finding collections in the university library, which as a teen I had access to, which was really nice. Just of these alchemical emblems, which are very mysterious. The tarot, got into tarot when I was like, 14, 15. And all this kind of connecting, leading back to Gnosticism and some of the sort of Gnostic occult groups of the 1800s that were, for instance, connected to tarot, right? Which is, I found out about those groups, and then I found out about their connections to the modern Gnostic church, yada, yada, yada. And as well, being a religious seeker, trying a few different paths, kind of coming back to, a call of Christianity, some kind of Christianity, and kind of looking back at my personal beliefs, my personal way of understanding the world, and seeing that actually synced up quite well with Gnosticism and allowed me to have this sort of Christ-centered spirituality while still having some of these other ideas, these other beliefs, these other things that I've always felt was true. The artistic thing as well, I haven't been an artist in a long time, but I was once a theater artist. I'm a professional writer, but hypothetically a creative writer as well. And I think a lot of what Jason just said can go for me. I think as well, living in the world that we live in now, I have a lot of criticisms of, and the word postmodern is also almost meaningless in the way that they're applied. So maybe I won't use it, but this, we live in the kind of a cynical, suspicious time. There's like a part of me. I remember even this as a teenager, where it's like, man, I wish I could quote unquote live in a simpler time, but where I could just have a simpler faith, right? And I'm trying not to parody or be critical of anybody who quote unquote has a simple faith, right? Even a simple faith of, say, Gnosticism or some of the cult groups like Martinism or something, right? We have all this. It would have been so much easier just to take it in as presented to one, even in the '90s, right? But more, there's so much more scholarship about this stuff. And you think about some of the esoteric legends connected to some of these groups, right? Well, maybe if it was the '70s or '80s, I literally believe those legends instead of taking them in figuratively, which is what I think the truth of them is, and perhaps in some cases is the intention. Rambling again. To make a long story short, the Gnosticism is a religion that's critical of religion. So if we're going to talk about a Gnostic approach, if we're going to not even be people of faith, right? Like if we're going to be atheistic, like we were talking about Harold Bloom on a recent episode, right? Who considered themselves a like an agnostic or atheist Gnostic, an agnostic Gnostic. Whose Gnosticism was done through literary criticism. So this critical approach, I think, is something that I need, right, and something that my heart and my mind can't accept, uh, even though it can be kind of difficult and annoying, right? Um, yeah,
To that point, actually, like I think there is I think I even referred to this on that last episode too, but Houston Smith had a lecture on Gnosticism that he gave ages ago, and I think you can find it on YouTube if you like Google Houston Smith Gnosticism. Maybe we'll try to post a link in the show notes if I can remember that. But where he talked about small g and big G Gnosticism, and big G Gnosticism is like our, generally the texts we consider to be Gnostic, the historical period and overall like literary genre, that we're calling a lot of those texts and ideas. But then small G Gnostic is, I think, to the point of what you just said there, John, a an approach, and in that respect, there is, I think, a capacity for folks to be Gnostic without encountering the texts at all. And um, and in terms of gnosis, I would even say like it's possible that you don't need to be Gnostic to experience gnosis. And perhaps if you are blessed with not needing a complicated approach, you know what I mean, or asking a lot of questions, then maybe gnosis is easier for you. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. But yeah, there are just certain presets that seem to be in me that resonate with Gnosticism, right? So
exactly.
in some ways, uh, um, Jason, honestly, for there's times when I wish I wasn't religious or could not be religious, right?
Yeah.
But I don't have any choice in the matter, right? Like,
Mhm.
so I feel like because of that, the Gnostic framework is the one that works best for me, and it is one that I think has a lot to offer people, right? We're not going out any, Jason and I aren't trying to make any converts, but I think that there's a lot in capital G, small G, Gnosticism that people can bring into their own lives and their own paths, right? Uh, and I think that's really important to remember and really important to disseminate. If we're kind of talking about being servants of the gnosis, which is more of a religious track, but then we're still servants of the gnosis. If an atheist stays an atheist and brings in some Gnostic insights into their life and their examination of the world.
Mhm. Well, yeah, and again, I can even find my way to an approach that is similar to being a servant of gnosis without a religious framework. Like I can wrap my head around that in a way that I think makes sense. That isn't requiring me to accept anything that I don't already accept, if that makes sense. Um,
Yes.
like I think honestly, like ethically, like if I'm willing to accept that there's something mysterious going on and there's some divine connection that I'm that I'm fostering when I make art or when I'm participating in any kind of spiritual process with others or when I'm doing a show like this. And if that connection is both positive um, and deeply like resonant and tends to lead to things like peace and charity and mercy, then then it's probably a good idea to keep doing it, whether or not I'm approaching it religiously. you know,
Yes.
um, which actually that might be kind of a good little bit of a segue in here too. Is I think like this is the other thing that I feel is often missing from the conversation in a lot of modern Gnosticism is that either we're talking about what people did a long time ago, or we're talking about um, uh, we, as in the overall like discourse out there, we are talking about like a hardcore dualist world where everything's out to get you, um, uh, or some variation on elements of that. Perhaps sometimes it's maybe more Valentinian or more like not as hardcore necessarily, but it's still um, uh, focused on a kind of a maybe an intense, sometimes like an unintentionally nihilistic, at least in my perspective, worldview. Is that what I don't find as often in the conversation is like, how do you approach this in your day to day life? Like, how do you be a Gnostic while somebody cuts you off in traffic? Um, and what are healthy approaches, and what are non-healthy approaches, like what are easy Gnostic traps, for if you're interested in Gnosticism and then encounter a particular idea, what's an easy trap you can accidentally fall into that a Gnostic cosmology tends to like really open up as a available option. I think some spiritual approaches that a lot of Gnostics can fall into, um, because of the way a lot of the cosmology has been approached or has been presented. So things like spiritual bypassing, magical thinking, um, uh, alternative spirituality as sometimes an excuse for um, like a particular um, worldview, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that basically was my list, but I think this is very important, and something that is especially relevant. I think actually those three issues are something that any religion, any faith needs to look at.
Sure.
But Gnosticism is all about traps. It's all about religious traps, right? We are constantly, for all the focus in sort of pop culture takes on Gnosticism, newbies takes on Gnosticism. The whole Gnosticism hates the body, right? It's all about the material world. And when you actually read the text, it's all about the spiritual world. It's all about the spiritual deceptions that we find ourselves in, right? And we go from sort of trap to trap. I think what's interesting is something that can work for us and work for us spiritually can be good and be a good thing actually. Um, but it can turn into a trap if I'm making sense, right? Sometimes you need to evolve. Sometimes your ideas need to evolve. Your practice needs to evolve. So something that can work for you for a little while can become a trap. So I think looking at these three traps, which are kind of interconnected, spiritual bypassing, magical thinking, mental illness, and spirituality, which is something that we need to do a whole show on. Something I'm going to have to do some research on that I really want to kind of dive into because it's a very tricky issue. I guess actually there's a fourth that I forgot to put on there, which is spiritual materialism. Yeah,
Mm.
y- very important. That's a term that's coined by a thinker that I'm not really a fan of anymore, but he was spot on with his concepts of spiritual materialism, making spirituality into something else that is feeds the ego and that you're proud of. Really, spiritual narcissism may be a better thing to refer to it as.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm more enlightened than you. I'm more enlightened than you with spiritual materialism.
So as a counterpoint to that, so those are some unhealthy approaches and some Gnostic traps that I can see there. What I think you gave this list as well, but like you talked about healthy spirituality having freedom of conscience, flexibility in practice and belief, um, no gurus who specifically want to either want something from you specifically or your money or your labor. I think those seem kind of really hopefully obvious, but like freedom of conscience. So that's like, would that be that that no faith is telling you to do something that your conscience is telling you not to do?
Yes, absolutely. And outside of that sort of day to day meaning of the word conscious, right? It's also that your morality is not, and your morality is not being dictated by a list of rules being passed down by a religion, right? Now your morality should be informed by religion, but we basically don't have a guru or tradition that has an extreme book of rules for you, right? The more than that, more out of just moral choices to get the kind of the more expansive term of consciousness, and is that you have the freedom to explore ideas and ways to live and ways to practice, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so there needs to be sort of a lot of these do come back to a kind of openness and flexibility, which at the same time, everything is the older I get, and the more I meditate upon this stuff, the middle path, right, in between two extremes. It sounds almost like fortune cookie of spirituality. Of course, it's a very important concept in Buddhism. It's a very important concept in Kabbalah. It's an important concept in Martinism. And
Mhm.
I've started to realize that the middle path is actually a deeply profound teaching, right? So there is this middle path approach, because if you make things too open, then you don't have anything anymore, right? You make it too shut, you get into some of these issues that we're talking about. So freedom of conscience is the connective, I would say, to that.
Mhm.
So I think as well, Jason. Sorry, this is a rant that I'll probably repeat in an extended form. But the Gnostics are all dead. We're the Gnostics now, and there is always this idea of we need to go back to the third century, right? Or we need to go back to whatever your favorite kind of flavor of Gnosticism is. I think kind of strangely, there would have been ancient Gnostics groups who um yeah, they probably thought that their opponents and people they didn't like were going to the burn in some kind of hell forever, right? I think what it means to be a modern Gnostic is to take in all of the last couple thousand years of spirituality, and to look at some of the developments and to look at some of the best aspects. And this is going to be very confusing, but uh, there's kind of misconceptions of what Gnosticism was that I think are actually kind of useful. And what I mean by that is, there's a lot of people in all sorts of different kind of groups, within the church, within the New Age, within scholarship, who have this idea of the Gnostics as um, a perfect early progressive feminists who had an alternative Christianity and an alternative spirituality, which was egalitarian and individually centered, yada yada yada. Now, there's truth actually to all those points, but it's that they were ancient peoples who had ancient views on things. So I think if we're looking at quote unquote an alternative Christianity, an alternative spirituality, w- these people who had these ideas that may not be historically true still helped develop Gnosticism, spread ideas about Gnosticism around, maybe had those ideas incorrect or one or two ideas that I just said wrong,
Mhm.
but other things correct. And I think we can still draw on all those sources, right? So yes, it's not what ancient Gnosticism was, but it is what it what it can be and what it should be, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
There's actually an example of misunderstanding, misappropriations that we can run with, because I think trying to figure out what it means to be a modern Gnostic, we can draw on these many sources, right? And we can help construct this spirituality that we want to see, while still having some rubrics, so it's not completely ego centered. It's not just a reflection of ourselves, right? That there is us the outside that's
Yeah, that there is a like an ability to recognize a pattern, like a pattern of effective and useful approaches, and to gather that pattern together. I think, yeah. So a couple of things on that, like uh, there is a like accepting a flexibility of practice and belief. I think is also kind of really useful here, in that um, like so you like we've even said earlier on, I am not a very churchy Gnostic. I'm a much more sort of philosophical aesthete, artistic Gnostic. um I think you do have you also have a lot of that aesthetic connection, but you do have a relationship to and an engagement with a more overt religious framing for Gnosticism. And you and I don't need, one of us doesn't need to be right and the other doesn't need to be wrong for us to have a conversation about Gnosticism. And I think this is kind of a, um, like we can have people on the show who might perhaps have a really intense dualist, demiurge, bad world prison vibe, and they don't need to be right and we don't need to be wrong, if that makes sense. We can expose that idea, we can encounter and discuss that idea. And I think because here's the other thing, is that like whatever is whatever is happening that we are calling gnosis, that spawned Gnosticism, that etc., like all of those things that are happening, um there's no uh at least as I understand it, there's no like um email we got from the divine that said this is exactly how it works in clear terms, meant with no ambiguity whatsoever. Like all we have are texts that were always meant to point to more than they could say, you know. um
Yes.
and so
I think that's a great way to sum it up. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so no one's right. No one has the authority to say the world is a prison and if you disagree with me you're wrong, because no one has a letter from the warden. you know. um uh but if you are engaged with that in a way that is fruitful for your progress, I don't need you to be wrong either, you know.
Yes. Yeah,
um
and I think as well. We don't have too many vocal critics. We get the occasional rude comment on Facebook, and that's it, right?
or you can.
Or YouTube. Yes, sorry, YouTube. YouTube much more actually. I worry. There's only so many hours in a day. So long we can talk. So long that people watching and listening will pay attention, right? We're going to hit a limit that they got things to do. They're going to skip over to another show, what have you. So I think I don't really get to fully explain. I think the show will probably allow me to do this. That a lot of times it sounds like I'm being very critical of what is Gnosticism and what isn't Gnosticism, and people who are doing Gnosticism right and people who are doing Gnosticism wrong. Now, it's been about 33 years now, 32 years I've had some sort of interest in Gnosticism, and the many years of now of the sort of engagement in it as a living religion. And I want to let people know that I really don't think that I have the answers, and I change my mind quite a bit all the time, right? And I do have a spirituality that in some ways is too open, right? It's a very what's the word I'm looking for? It's there's not a lot of definites with me. So I want people to know that I don't think I'm the Pope in Gnosticism, and I don't think that you're doing Gnosticism wrong, right? There's only a few exceptions where I will say that is definitely not Gnosticism. You are doing it wrong, and that's what it is. A toxic cult, right?
Yeah.
That's what it is. A dangerous racist. There's definitely a few examples, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
for sure. Well, and to that point too, I think, or maybe just as a coda to a lot of what we just covered here, I think like as we're talking about a lot of these ideas, and as we move through, like we're gonna dive into, like try to dive into all the major texts of the Nag Hammadi, trying to talk about Philip K. Dick and like current events in Gnosticism, like current expressions of it. Um, as we're going through a lot of these things, we're not we might engage with an idea and be excited about it, but rather than saying, is this true, capital T true, the question for me is always, is it useful? Does it lead to gnosis? Is it helping towards that overall expression and search as fellow travelers? The other thing too, about like what is good Gnosticism, what is bad Gnosticism. Neither of us are Gnostic popes. There is no Gnostic pope, um, at least as I understand the term and believe in it. There's no Gnostic pope. Um, but I think what I also want to, I think maybe one of the big reasons we're also expressing this is that is like, we have a Patreon. I think it's fair to say this is the closest I'm going to get in this episode to pitching it. If you want to contribute to the show, great. If you want to subscribe to it, that would be wonderful. But what we're not doing here is going to find content specifically that will lead to more subscriptions. We're not going to find an approach that uh, frankly might pander to a feeling people are getting from Gnosticism that makes them like we don't want to only dwell on the things that appeal. We want to also engage with the questions, and which is also, I think, to say, hopefully, that this approach, that we're not going to specifically sell you Gnosticism or sell you a particular approach. It hopefully means that you might have a sense of you don't have to trust our conclusions, but I think you can trust our motives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's we are good, pure people, and we show this by not giving you anything extra by contributing to the Patreon. So that's how we that's how you're $5. And actually have to update the Patreon really soon with like there's tons of wrong information on there. For what you get for your money. But we will eventually go back to giving you the shows early, and we probably will think of some sort of bonus that you get for signing up. That will be, I think, definitely coming. I've been, now everybody who watches the show loyally knows I've been saying this for a couple of years now. I think this is the year that it's coming, Jason. Some sort of bonus. But
Well, I'll tell you, here's I think a really simple idea for a bonus is, I think if we have like we've been developing a list of topics that we want to talk about. Frankly, maybe people on the Patreon could be able to vote for the one they want to see next. No one, and they might get it earlier. There won't be any content that'll stay behind a paywall that you have to subscribe to get. But if you are hungry for a conversation that you want us to have sooner, then the Patreon might be a way to be a part of that. And so perhaps in that respect, you're part of that conversation or part of that engagement slightly earlier than when we release it generally. But that's I think a simple thing we can do that also doesn't suggest that we are only going to do what the patrons might pay money for, if that makes sense.
no, absolutely. There's this idea of audience capture, right? Where sometimes you develop a very specific audience. We love our audience, and we want to give you content that you're interested in and that you want, right? But at the same time, the we want this to have wide appeal, as much as a show of Gnosticism can. Sometimes of audience capture, that's just it. To get the money, you appeal to a certain segment, and then that actually sort of twists your content because you're only pumping out stuff that appeals to these supporters, right? And for us, Jason and I are blessed to have jobs. That doesn't always apply to me. And actually, there has been times when like the Patreon money which is not very much, right? We don't pay ourselves very much. The majority of the money goes, we have to pay for StreamYard, we have to pay for some fees, but it has paid my rent at least once or twice, right? And there wasn't anywhere else I was going to get that money. This is the exciting life of our writer folks. So to make a long story short, that's not why we do the show, right? And but that said, if you do want to sign up for the Patreon, we're not going to say no. And I think there probably will be ways that we will develop that because we want to get back again, baby work, yada yada. We haven't quite gotten back to a weekly show yet. We're coming very close. This is something else I've been promising for a couple of years now, but I feel like 2025 is it. And even with this new show, this new project, whatever we want to call it, plus Pop Gnosis, plus some other things that may come up. It looks like we might even be able to get to I wouldn't mind getting to 2 shows a week, right? Um,
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Let's not get too ambitious.
So there are things that you can help us do by contributing to the Patreon, right? Like every dollar that you spend does help not just keep the show going, but to actually improve, because there is a certain plateau just with production, with advertising, with social media, that even with a little bit of Patreon money that we get now, that we can't devote any more time to, right? That we can't, that we don't have the resources for, that we can't buy that software that will automatically send out that post, right? So we are sort of there is sort of a plateau that we are starting to reach with the show, and it would be nice to get over that, right?
Yeah,
So to make a long story short, that's sort of the complicated thing with money. But if all the patrons disappear tomorrow, we would find that, as I said, that there's just a couple software things we have to pay for, but we'd still do the show. We'd
yeah,
find some way around it, right?
exactly.
Yes.
We
Please
still do the
let
show.
people know that, yeah, we're good and pure. We're not in it for the money, but we're not going to say no to the money.
We're not going to say no to the money. And I think like the other thing, again, to put a cap on a lot of that, is that like we're not going to choose and create content because that's what the quote unquote algorithm seems to be favoring. Like if you're a D&D nerd like me, then YouTube is often um, sharing with me videos of like Wizards of the Coast has ruined D&D. D&D will never survive. Like all of these exciting headlines and things like that. And um, I'd like to think that that there is diminishing returns of that kind of a process for any kind of content creator.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
I said fingers crossed. I hope that you're right.
Fingers crossed. Well, like because frankly, it's only useful and interesting for the period in which it's released, and hopefully, I think a lot of what the stuff that you and I do, we would rather be evergreen. We would rather not be reacting to a particular thing, not um, and hey, I mean, maybe we'll get into this deeper in another episode. I think trying to create content that's specifically trying to scare our audience or make them react out of like a, oh my god, 12 reasons to agree with the demiurge. That's like that's archonic thinking. That is thinking about how can I manipulate people, how can I influence them, not how can I respect them. That's a hot take from me here.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with all that. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to talk about. We do want content to be evergreen, but of course, that
Yeah,
doesn't mean that we're not going to talk about some important issues in the
yeah.
world, or do stuff on pop culture, or
Mhm.
we stay away from politics, but there's certain things in the news that reflect upon Gnosticism that we can discuss, right?
Yeah.
So we're still going to be doing that, but not in this clickbaity hop on the trends, hop on the algorithm way, because that's not what we're about. Jason, I something else we also need to get better at is and get some templates for, of course, is for the thumbnail images for YouTube, right? But I've known for a long time that if we put the human beings are more likely to click if there's a human face on there, and they're more likely to click if and the algorithm likes human faces on YouTube thumbnails, right? Which is
Mhm.
fine. I could definitely start adding like me and the guest or you, but the one thing like I can't bring myself to do is like a picture of me making the soy face pointing at the demiurge. Now, for those people who are watching at home, the soy face is you see it plenty of times, especially on YouTube. It's a big open mouth smile. And sorry, like the term probably comes from the alt right. Sorry about that. Right, every Mr. Beat thumbnail.
Yeah.
So we could probably get up in the algorithm by putting me and Jason. Actually, that should be that should be the thumbnail for the show. That's like that's one thing I can't bring myself to do that could possibly help the show, right? So there are certain because we are the two good boys. There are things that we want to do to protect the integrity of the program, right? That said, Patreon.com /Gnostic forward one-time donations
And as always, like subscribe to the show, share it with people, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I make this joke every show. People like hearing the same jokes over and over again, because I'm funny and looking smart, cute, and I smell nice. Which is this is to literally like Jason and I on the show and off the show have talked about the archonic, demiurgic aspects of AI, right? Where even if you read some of the Gnostic texts, like the archons are an artificial intelligence, right? They do not have the same kind of intelligence, soul spark that humans have, and sometimes it's kind of weird because they're also anthropomorphized processes that help run the world, right? Like really, the if you read some of the Gnostic texts, and I'm not saying this is literally true, but that it is like they're describing algorithms, like they're describing AI, right? It's a very interesting connection to the modern world. So living in a world that is ruled by algorithms, right? And I say this at the end of every show. At the same time, there are some things that we have to do and want to do, liking, subscribing, sharing the show, subscribing. If you're on YouTube, subscribing if you're on a podcatcher, turning on automatic downloads on whatever pod program that you use. All those help the show. What that does is it tells the algorithm that people like us, and it gets us into the suggestions. It lifts us up higher. That means more people find the show. So just to really explain that, because I think people, when we do the little commercial for like, subscribe, they just think that it's they don't know why, right? Or okay, I know why they want me to subscribe, but it is at the end of the day to play this algorithmic game. It is a game that Jason, that I don't want to speak for you, but it is one that I don't mind playing as opposed to some of the others, right? So please do all those things. The other thing to do as well, which again I say at the end of every show, but we're wrapping up. We don't have much time. Which is sharing the show. Sharing on social media is an algorithm thing, but of course it just helps people find it. It's just telling people about the show or taking your favorite episode and emailing it to somebody. This is very powerful in this day and age. Like the person that wants this stuff.
Yeah. And here's the thing is like the person to person stuff, literally subscribing, literally sharing the show, turning on automatic downloads. Those are all things that like both help the algorithm and like are like have a direct connection to you engaging with our conversation versus us making a Mr. Beast face, which has no like often has no bearing on the content, but it's just to boost us in the algorithm, which I have more of an ethical issue with. But yeah, as we're wrapping up, and I think even as we're wrapping up, I also want to say, I know we do actually we have subscribers on YouTube, we have subscribers on our the podcatchers, and we have Patreons or patrons. And so thank you to all of you for what you have already let us be able to do. The fact that that Talk Gnosis has been going for on as long as it has is huge. Um, Again, part of the reason that what inspired this idea was that I felt like of a more use based conversation of practicing Gnostics was that Talk Gnosis itself, I think, has covered so much territory of like what is Gnosticism, what are various texts in an intro level, like 101. How do you talk? Like, what is this thing? What is this thing? That it felt like it was almost necessary for us to say, okay, now what? Um, and we couldn't have done all that without the people who've already supported us. Um, so yeah, so again, to kind of wrap up, so we're fellow journeyers we're fellow travelers on this journey of Gnosticism. A lot of what we're bringing to this overall conversation is criticality. We're examining the map is not the territory. We're examining the map and the territory, if that makes sense. We're talking about both. A useful voice, I hope for, which is to say that it's not this isn't vague or disconnected from any kind of use as a practitioner. So we're not ignoring either the map or the territory. We're talking about both. And when I talk about this notion of the fellow travelers, that Gnosticism is a landscape that has no single consensus map. So maybe a Philip K. Dick reference here. There's no, the consensus reality idea. Like And so part of what we're going to be doing is comparing maps. We're going to be like, to belabor the metaphor, we're going to have like pull out this sea chart and this like, treasure map, and they both kind of talk about Gnosticism. And we're going to see how they relate to each other. Um, and you and I, we pack different stuff in our travel bags in terms of how we approach these texts, how different texts appeal to us, how we feel that they have a spark of Gnosticism in it. Ultimately, we're trying to find points on the map that lead to useful, healthy options. And we kind of talked earlier about what we consider to be healthy. So that's, I think, the like wrapping this up here. And John's already alluded to this, but I think like we're already gearing up for the next episode in this overall style, which is to talk about what's the general landscape of contemporary Gnosticism. How are people finding it and engaging with it? And so I would love, actually, this, we don't do this too often, but this is a podcast YouTube trope. Let us know in the comments. How did you find Gnosticism? Where did you first encounter it? Where do you currently engage with it? Hopefully it's Talk Gnosis, but obviously there's going to be other sources out there. Is there a text or a media type that you go back to a lot? Yeah, like let us know, because I know that there's ours. We've sketched on them here. We've done previous episodes on them, but yeah, we're wanting to, if we're going to start mapping Gnosticism, then we need to hear from fellow travelers.
It's not because we want to suck you into the Talk Gnosis cult. We really want you to comment because we actually do care. Like, we honestly do. Like, we want to hear other perspectives of Gnosticism. We want to hear what about the issues that Jason just raised. We want to get these conversations going. We want gold to come out of these conversations. And it's I think I speak for both Jason and I that this is very genuine. This is what we love, right? We want to, the discussion that Jason and I are having right now, it's just two of us, we want to have with all 15,000 of you, right? So we have about 15,000, I guess, viewers, watchers, if we add everything up. And I say this at my parish, right? So I have a deacon. I have a small group here in Montreal. And it's the kind of thing that sounds like culty BS. Thank you for coming, but it is completely genuine. Which is, I really love when people talk, and people almost always talk at parish now, right? We have great discussions. I think it's the same thing with you, Jason, in Alberta, right? Like, you guys have some great jaws, I'm assuming. Which is, when people open their mouths, I'm so in my head, right? And as I said, I'm not the Pope of Gnosticism. I have a very flexible spirituality, a very flexible approach to this stuff. But at the same time, I have certain ideas, I have certain perspectives, and a lot of the times those are challenged in a really healthy way. And I see things that I didn't see before. I have new interpretations that I didn't have before. And what that is Gnosis, right? Like, people are sharing their Gnosis with me, and I am growing in Gnosis through that. So that I get a lot out of that here live in person in Montreal. So we really love to get that going in the comments on YouTube, on social media. So that, not to be selfish, not just so that Jason and I can expand our Gnosis, but of course everybody will, right? Everybody who comments will be getting these new perspectives, these new ideas, these new ways to understand this stuff. So definitely contribute. Plus, you'll help drown out, and you can still comment if you're one of these, but every once in a while, we get all caps people telling us that we're wrong, and God came to them last night and told them how alive are wrong, and maybe we should become their follower before the world ends on February 16th, right? So if you are commenting, you help drown those people out. We love you people too, though. You keep watching the show. And I didn't say stop commenting. I just said that we'll help drown them out. Keep commenting, as well as all the people, the other most common comment we get, of course, is just people telling us that we're going to hell. So, maybe they're right. Maybe that is an expansion of my Gnosis.
Well, and there's a challenge for us too, is maybe at some point in the future to do an episode where we're specifically engaging with people who strongly disagree with us. And our goal is not to argue with them. Our goal is to try to find some spark, some useful bit of the map in what they're saying. That would be an interesting challenge, I think. Great. Well, yeah. So again, hopefully this has been interesting. This has been a bit of a meta episode, but I think we did cover topics that are interesting to Gnostics. So hopefully that that has also been interesting and useful and engaging for you. But hopefully, also this feels like a promise of more. If you enjoyed this conversation, tune in soon because we're going to have more episodes coming soon. And yeah, I think with that, I'm going to let you go. John, anything else you want to leave anybody with?
I think that's it. So thanks so much, everybody, and of course, another thing to leave in the comments to send us is future show ideas for this particular show. So, okay, take care, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye.